comments directly at the Secretary of State. It is a nationalisation in all but name bill at one level in terms of the powers it gives. Indeed, it actually gives more powers than a nationalisation bill. It will allow the government to do things that it couldn't do under a nationalisation bill. I frankly would have voted for one. I'm not a fan of nationalisation, as you will know. I would have voted for nationalisation. I will vote for this bill for a simple reason. This buys us time. It's a reprieve, not a rescue. I think that's what people have to understand. And I say this to the Honourable Gentleman for Boston and Skegness. I don't agree with him in terms of his strategic nationalisation argument. Nationalisation under these circumstances buys the Secretary of State time and leverage. And he needs to be able to make his own judgment as to when he exercises that time and leverage. We got just a hint of a view of how complex this game that that Yingya are playing is. And in fact, if anything, if I were going to recommend an amendment to the bill, it would be to limit the amount of money, i.e. to 1 penny, that the government could pay to Yingya, because then the government couldn't, no court could challenge it, and they would know full well they're not on line to make money out of the British taxpayer. So I think we have to look at it in strategic and tactical terms, in terms of what we're trying to do. Will she forgive me? I think lots of people are trying to get in. I'm going to refer to something she said in a minute. If she really needs to come in, I'll let her in there. But so we're trying to manage a disaster for Scunthorpe, which is local to me, as she knows, and my community, members of my community work at Scunthorpe. The knock-on in economic effects will be much bigger than one town. It will be thousands upon thousands of people all around. And of course a disaster as well for our last primary steelmaker. And that has suddenly become more important. I mean, it was always important. It was always an important part of national strategy. But Mr. Trump has made it a vital piece, an unavoidable piece of national strategy. And we have to create a circumstance for the Secretary of State and for the government which allows us to manoeuvre through that. Now, that does mean, as people have said already, an energy policy that makes this operation viable. Not just viable when it's owned by the state, viable, commercially viable. It means, and that means an energy policy which is not the highest energy costs of our competitors, which where it is now. It also means we have to think very hard about carbon supply. At the moment, the technology does not exist to make primary steel without carbon supply, so we have to think about that too. And that actually is a strategic supply, so we can't rely on another country for it. And what I want to see is this bill used in a way which gives him the time to deliver on that, but which gives this House the right to see what he's doing, the right to see how the strategies are turning out, because nobody has got this right. I mean, if the government benches want me to, I can go back to 1997 and park blame if they really want to, but I don't want to do that today. I want to make this viable. So we have to get our energy, our environment, and our industrial policies all in line to make this work. To put it in context, last year, British Steel lost, I think, about 408 million pounds. That was the September number. This year, it's about 250 million. Neither of them are small amounts of money, and the Treasury would shut down an operation if we just left something like that inside the government for very long. So we need a new strategy that cuts our carbon emissions without exporting the industries to the rest of the world. And that's, I'm afraid, most of our successes in carbon reduction in this last decade or two or three have been by dint of exporting the industry, often to countries with much worse records than us. In this case, it would be China. They have 50% of the world market already. They have massive excess in terms of steel capacity, and their steel capacity is the most carbon inefficient there is. So we're actually worsening the circumstance. Briefly, quickly, please.
Very briefly, our committee has taken very clear evidence that we need a carbon border adjustment mechanism so that actually carbon-rich steel like that from China is taxed much more heavily. But crucially, what's needed on the table now are the steel safeguards from the Trade Remedy Authority to guard our markets from a flood-tide of Chinese steel right now.
Yeah, I'm afraid he's right. I mean, and the difficulty is we're in a new world in this. I mean, the entire trade the entire trade. I mean, the terrible thing that the House will only ever hear me say this once, but Trump has a small point in some respects, and we have to deal with the world as it is. Now, can I come to the sunset clause with the Secretary of State? I can imagine the instinct is not to put a sunset clause in because, in dealing with a difficult negotiator like this, you're putting a backstop. And whenever you put a backstop on yourself, you give your other side a negotiating advantage. Can I say this to him? He mentioned in his opening speech that the Civil Contingencies Bill would be a route, right? For the House, who won't have read it, we spent a year putting it in place under the Blair government. It's got recourse to Parliament at every turn. Ministers are properly controlled. It has to be transparent and so on. What I might suggest to him is if at some point he organises a transition to that so the House has greater control. The COVID bill didn't have that. It missed all those defences, and look what happened to the policy as a result. So that's what I would like to see. Recourse to Parliament. Actions that he takes to manage the survival of Scunthorpe, policies to ensure its viability, and in post-Putin Trump era, security of supply. All of these things we want to see, and we can organise legislation to permit that. So I ask him, take the House into his confidence and do this properly.
Chris